Hello, welcome. We are so excited to have Claire Latané here today to be one of the Landscape Architecture Hyde speakers. Claire is here because of her expertise in designing K through 12 schoolyards. She is a writer, an ecologist, and a landscape architect. She practiced professionally in landscape architecture in Los Angeles and has recently made the transition to academia, where she's an assistant professor at Cal Poly. She was one of the inaugural LAF, which is the Landscape Architecture Fellows, in 2017, in which her research on schoolyards, the relationship between green landscapes and mental health, was the foundation for that fellowship. She's working on a book which is going to address this topic in greater depth, which will come out hopefully in 2021 with Island Press. So keep that on your radar for the future. She was participating as a design critic in Professor Bisek and Professor Hardy's Collaborate Studio this afternoon. And don't be shy, she's got a lot of great knowledge. So if you have additional questions, please feel free. We'll have a question and answer session after, or you can come up to Claire and introduce yourself. So Claire, welcome to Lincoln, Nebraska. We're happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was magic. My mic just turned on. I want to get a sense of who's in the room for students. I know you have architects, landscape architects, and interiors students. Who's an architecture student? Okay. Interiors? And landscape? Okay. Nice cluster up there, you can tell. And we're getting a sense of our human need to be able to see out and to have a sense of refuge with this back-heavy room. So I don't blame you. Today I'm going to talk about nature and nurture, designing schools to support mental health and well-being. And I want to preface by saying that I know I was lucky to have great public schools growing up. First, in the 1970s in Columbus, Ohio. This is one of my childhood schools. And then in Chapel Hill, I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill for my undergraduate degree in journalism, and finally went to Cal Poly Pomona outside of Los Angeles for my master's in landscape architecture in 2003. And each one was an excellent public education, something that I took for granted. It was my children that introduced me to the plight of our urban public schools. In 2005, my last year of graduate school, I got priced out of my upper middle class neighborhood where I was renting a house. It was the height of the housing bubble. Many of you probably don't remember that. And I moved to the closest neighborhood that I could sort of afford that had passable schools. And that was Eagle Rock, an old 1920s neighborhood of Los Angeles, where Occidental College is located. That was put on the map recently because President Obama spent some of his undergrad time there. This was the first day of school for my oldest two children, Felicity and Jacob. And this was the school that they were so excited to attend and that I was so excited to send them to because it got really good ratings. And as you can see from this image, it has this beautiful wide front parkway and 100-year-old deodar cedars out front. So it presented this really nice, soft, green edge to the 20s elegant school building. We hadn't gone inside for a tour because we moved halfway through the summer. Their excitement and mine drained pretty quickly when we went in and found this as their schoolyard. They had been to 2 different elementary schools before this, and I had attended probably 3 or 4 in my life, and this was the first time any of us had experienced a schoolyard that was predominantly asphalt. This matters a lot in Los Angeles because of our weather. Students spend a lot of time on their schoolyard. They line up in the mornings on their schoolyard to wait for their teachers to come out and take them into their classrooms. And at lunch, they eat outside under the lunch shelter here, or under umbrellas, or just wherever they can find a spot in the middle and high schools. And then after school, they wait for their after-school programs to start or for their parents to pick them up on the schoolyard, on the asphalt, where there might be a few little sad trees trying to grow, but predominantly it's asphalt. To give you a little bit of context, backing up a little, Eagle Rock is a neighborhood that's right between Glendale and Pasadena. Pasadena is where the Rose Bowl is every year, so you may be familiar with that. And we're kind of nestled into a crook of two, not so major, but still freeways. And then you can see from the rough sort of larger texture of the urban fabric, there's a couple of commercial corridors here, and then another one there. So we're about a block away from a major transportation corridor from Northeast LA down to Los Angeles. This happened to be the end of a red car line in the 20s that brought a lot of development. That's why this neighborhood was situated here. And it's why the roads are so wide now. Southern California is one of 5 Mediterranean climates around the world. They tend to be on the west coasts of continents. And what they share is a long, dry summer and a rainy season in the winter. Their plant communities tend to be small and scrubby. And the rainfall, unlike Lincoln and most of the country, where you get a little rain all throughout the year, we get our rain between December and March, and then about 8 months of dry. So what that means is that you have 8 months for all of the pollution that comes from the freeways and the major roads to collect on surfaces like rooftops and playgrounds. And this is what that asphalt looks like from above. That's 8 months of pollution collecting there. My kids, just to give you an idea of what that feels like in real life, would come home every day after school with gray bands around their wrists and their ankles from the pollution that would pile up, that would just like permeate their clothing as they played on that surface. And because we are a sunny climate, their feet would burn through their shoes from standing on this asphalt. And that probably happens here too, during the really hot months, I would imagine, because it gets hot in the Midwest as well. But here we have sunny days, often interspersed throughout the year, and they're outside on that hot playground. And we found that from a study done a few years ago by a local nonprofit watershed group organization, they studied all 509 Los Angeles public elementary schools. And they found that Eagle Rock, through an analysis using GIS, this was actually funded in order to study sun exposure for health purposes. And they found that Eagle Rock wasn't so unusual to other LA schools. The overall school site had 15% tree canopy cover. The average school site in Los Angeles had about 11. But on the play area, only 6% was covered by tree cover. And then the unpaved surfaces, or the surfaces where a student might be able to touch dirt or mulch or a tree, something alive, was only 11% on the school site and 7% where the students were actually able to play in the play area. The averages, you can see, are just slightly above that. Not a very diverse landscape. In 2009, during the recession, diversity is good for economics as well as biodiversity. I decided to start teaching a little bit in case I were to lose my job in private practice, which was a very real possibility. And so I had the opportunity to teach a senior landscape architecture studio, and we used Eagle Rock as our case study. We worked with my son's second, third grade teacher. It was a split level class who were studying mapping. And my students taught the second and third graders mapping and the basics of watershed health, ecological design, the importance of designing with nature. And then they worked to gather the students' ideas about what they would like to see in their playground. So you can see this student wanted, I don't know if you can tell, this says grazing area, there's a pond, there's a lot of X's. These buildings happen to be the temporary bungalows, which is a euphemism for a trailer. They typically have no windows. I love this student's idea of, I really don't care what it is as long as it's green. And then this student sort of has intuitively what we need, what research shows that we need as people. The Kaplan's research looking into preference of landscape shows people like meandering trails. They like a sense of discovery, a sense of mystery, as well as a sense of prospect and refuge, right? This happens to also have a pond up where the teacher's parking lot is. Making us question how useful is that single-purpose space to the students' experience. And at the end of that exercise, my students made a plan for the greater Eagle Rock neighborhood. This is a pedestrian safety plan for the streets surrounding the school, and then they looked at the Eagle Rock Elementary site as well. This group had their big idea as growth. And the idea was based on the premise that they would plant native plants to attract insects and wildlife and invite interaction from the students through play, reclaiming a relationship between students and nature. You can see their layered drawing showed the pathway circulation, maintaining access into and out of the buildings, the presence of softer surfaces, a large area of reclaimed nature and tree canopy, and then the mood being very much one of life and vibrance and butterflies and birds and all of these things that bring wonder to students. It's really the epitome of a transformation of asphalt into an ecosystem. They have details like a year-round food garden, chicken coops, stormwater treatment through a dry riverbed where students can really experience the landscape coming alive. And at the end, we presented our findings and the students' work to a group of teachers, parents, and the principal. And we shared the 50 years of research that had been done so far 10 years ago by the Kaplans, the University of Illinois researchers such as William Sullivan, Francis Ming Kuo, Andrea Faber-Taylor, and their graduate students, all showing this restorative aspect of nature. The way that leaves blowing in the breeze or sun glinting off of water or birds singing brings us back to ourselves and lets us reduce stress, reduce our heart rate, restore a sense of calm. That helps students learn better. It fell on deaf ears. The principal at the time was temporary. She really didn't want to make waves, so nothing happened. Until a year and a half later, a few parents, including Amanda Millett, a child advocate, heard rumors about our presentation and the students' work, and they approached a new principal who was very willing to promote change, and they decided to go after a grant to green the schoolyard. So I worked with them to give them some basic design principles, working with nature, and they came up very quickly with this concept design that would remove some asphalt, put in a grass field, some shade trees, and a little rain garden down slope to catch the rain before it flooded the basement here, which happened frequently. And they won the grant. The California Proposition 84 Stormwater Grant. Prop 84 is a safe drinking water, water quality and supply, flood control, river and coastal protection bond act of 2006. So you can kind of get a sense of its primary goals. It also was a great vehicle to get funding for a green schoolyard. Our application stated that we would remove asphalt, install permeable surfaces and bioretention areas, expand the school garden, and provide better connection to the community. The school district, which manages 1,100 schools at the time, said thanks, but no thanks. And 5 other schools that won this grant sort of walked away, but Eagle Rock Elementary had the benefit of having some very stubborn people associated with it. So over the next 4 or 5 years that it took to get the district and the school and the nonprofit that held the grant, the Los Angeles Beautification Team, on the same page, we gathered quite a team. Dr. Marcy Rainey, who's a kinesiology professor at Occidental College, was brought in by the PTA president at the time, Dr. Bevan Aschenmiller, she's an environmental economist. She had served on Obama's Economic Advisory Council, and this project and this process caused her to switch her research focus from recycling to green schoolyards. In the meantime, she brought in Dr. Rainey, who set up a before and after study of Eagle Rock Elementary School, which is now published. And I can find that for you if you're interested, or at least a link to the journal article. And then Sharon Danks, who had gone to undergraduate college with Bevan, wrote the book Asphalt to Ecosystems. And she was a guide through our process to help us learn how to communicate and sort of set the principles. And this is an image of the 4 of us in Berlin a couple years ago, the International Green Schoolyards Alliance, which I got to go to because of my fellowship. And it's a picture I include because I want to stress the importance of relationships and how everyone you meet can be a potential collaborator or benefactor of your projects. After many iterations working with the principal, well, first, I should say, a month or 2 after I switched jobs to work at Studio MLA, I think that was in 2014 or 15, I got a phone call from the nonprofit that held this grant asking for a design. And it was just, I don't know if it was dumb luck or karma or what, but I had the opportunity to actually work on this school design as well as study it for years. So after many iterations, working with the teachers, the principal, more students, and the school district, this is the plan as it landed. We took out 21,000 square feet. This funky shape is there because we were working with a budget of $350,000, which sounds like a lot of money until you start ripping up asphalt, testing soil, and working in a school district that requires some specific things like union wages and all of the different policy obstacles that you need to meet to ensure the safety and welfare of children. We put in tree rows north and south to try to provide some shade eventually as they got bigger to the east and west, and also to break up the sense of this large expanse. And then this field looks like this because there was two existing kickball diamonds here and here. And rather than have a green space in the middle where students could trip as they were going from one side to the other, the principals suggested actually, which turned out to be a good one, make one grass and the other asphalt. It was a good test. Why not make both of them grass, you might ask? Cost was a factor. The fact that this is a groundbreaking experiment was a factor. And then we made a little park-like circle because a big part of why we wanted to convert the schoolyard to landscape was to provide shade. And one of the things that you don't get from an athletic field that's made of grass is shade and the opportunity to play more creatively. We have a learning garden here that was so popular because it had stumps and logs that 3 months after it was built, we got a little money to build a second one. And then this kinder yard is now in progress. This is what 21,000 square feet of asphalt looks like when it's finally removed. That's the principal raising her hand, and this is Sharon Romano, who held the grant. She's the director of the Los Angeles beautification team and a real, true local hero. Part of my role as designer, doubling as community advocate, was to help train Sharon's team, who was made up of at-risk youth who were installing the landscape, and to organize community volunteer tree planting days, which were required mostly because the state grants only cover funding to 15-gallon trees, which are, they're like this thick and easy for children to snap. And that's great when you're talking about a restoration project and to get trees established. You want to plant them really small, but it's not so great on a elementary school campus that's too small to begin with and where students might accidentally break them. So the parents paid for a few larger sized trees to put in key places. Here are the native plants going in on a slight hill, just about 18 to 24 inches high, so that when the plants grew up, you get this sense of separation, and that's the ribbon cutting. This is the plan implemented. The school district decided to test a cool coating on the asphalt as part of this project. So that's the tan and the blue, and it's supposed to be high albedo so that it doesn't heat up as much. This is right after the project went in, the kids playing around these tiny little trees, what it looked like before, what it looked like after a good season of rain. You're starting to get some presence there of the trees. The learning garden, this little hillside with the native plants, and a teacher using it as an outdoor classroom. A year later, after a good rain, you can start getting this sense that there's a feeling of being away there. And then even on the tree rows, this sense of separation, that this giant, overwhelming asphalt slab is now being separated into more sort of welcoming, understandable rooms. And this is a video of the before and after. Dr. Rainey's longitudinal study found that after the green schoolyard, this is how they're using it before it was improved. After the green schoolyard, antisocial behaviors fell, and activity levels in girls and fifth graders went up. You can see how sort of monotonous and sad this schoolyard was.
It's been fantastic. I mean, they're running, they're playing, they're tumbling. It's inviting a lot more creativity. There are all kinds of different surfaces to explore, logs to climb on and stumps to jump off of. So it invites just sort of a different interaction with the environment than they get on your basic asphalt.
So And Principal Leach has become one of our biggest advocates, as you can imagine, because she's seen firsthand the better behavior and how that transforms into learning readiness. Her teachers say that students come in, instead of fighting and needing a lot of correction, they come in ready to learn. The Landscape Architecture Foundation Fellowship allowed me to explore this connection between place and mental health. Because, you know, people go through hard things all the time. And it wasn't that I thought that the design of their schools would solve these issues, but it certainly wasn't helping. First, a little context. Anxiety has now beat out depression as the #1 reason college students seek counseling. I'm sure lots of you can relate to this, right? The number of hospitalized suicidal teenagers doubled in the past 10 years. And it's now the leading cause of death for children aged 10 to 18. 70% of youth in state and local juvenile justice systems have a mental illness. Autism spectrum disorder rates increased 15% between 2012 and 2014 in just 2 years. And the rates of ADHD nearly doubled over the past 20 years. Our teenagers have the added stress of trying to fix a world that we adults have let crash in on their futures. From climate change to gun control in the face of school shootings and daily neighborhood violence. Our young people are advocating for, fighting for, and pleading for our help. Millennial childhoods were defined by 9/11 and Columbine. Generation Z, those born after 1996, have been largely shaped by the Sandy Hook Elementary School tragedy and the wave of school shootings that seem to permeate our news and our consciousness. A 2018 Pew Research Foundation study determined that despite the rarity of such events, 0.003% of children experienced a school shooting. 57% of American teenagers worry about a shooting at their school. The Los Angeles Unified School District mental health director screened students in the district and found that 50% of those screened were diagnosable with moderate to severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Our school children are suffering. And in the face of this stress and trauma, the design of their schools, both inside and out, fail to support their mental health and well-being. In fact, most school environments in urban areas at least, but I would argue any area, make things worse. Our students don't need security grates, school policing, truancy notices, and school lockdowns. What they need and deserve is schools that will guide them into adulthood with empathy, support, and love. This wasn't always the case. School campuses were once designed to be these beautiful, collegiate, welcoming, open campuses with generous lawns and large gardens. And these are urban schools in Los Angeles. Over time, they slowly succumbed to pressures of a growing school population, auto-centric planning, and then concern for safety, and of course, the always present concern for maintenance. Even new schools, such as these, while sometimes designed by highly regarded architects, lack empathy for students' experiences. And they prioritize abstract architectural statements, secure entries, and vandal-proof materials over student comfort, mental health, and well-being. This graph represents how many students, shown in red, and staff in blue, see if I can get it to go, agreed or strongly agreed with the statement, "I feel safe at school." And pink is parents who agreed or strongly agreed to the statement, "My child is safe at school." And you can see even as we go to schools where students feel safer and safer, there is this huge gap between the adults in their lives and the students in the perception of safety. We forget as adults that the daily pressures that students face and the impact it has on their experience in school. Schools can be designed with restorative environments to help students feel safe. Unlike programs that are geared towards teachers or staff identifying students in need of mental health services, the physical school improvements on a site can help everyone who uses that site, whether they're identified or not. And there are statistics that like 1 out of 5 students will actually get mental health services. So considering the environment that is beneath it all is really important. This idea that school environments can improve quality of life, as you know, is not new, but it's rarely used in conversations about school design. Remember the restful attention? There's been much more in the last even several decades focus on school designs that actually support increased social cohesion, improved test scores, higher self-esteem, lower teen pregnancy rates, reduced crime, and a deeper sense of community. Rodney Matsuoka's doctoral dissertation in University of Michigan on 100 Michigan high schools found that larger classroom windows and higher activity levels outside of schools associated with less student crime. Wide open views, even if they were of living grass, associated with more student crime. With the support of the American, or the Association for Women in Architecture Foundation in Los Angeles Fellowship, I was able to look a little more deeply into this research and pick out some design strategies, some themes. These key connections, or the key themes, are evidence-based security design, student engagement, and the mind-body environment relationship. The following strategies are simple. Sometimes they might seem obvious, but they're not being used mostly in school design conversations today. The first is to use an integrated, inclusive design process. How many of you in the room have heard of CPTED, or crime prevention through environmental design? No? Okay, I'm surprised a little bit. Crime prevention through environmental design was started in the 60s or 70s as an inclusive process to get everyone in the same room, including law enforcement and community members, to design in response to a community-based process. But in the last few decades, it became sort of a checklist of approaches, and one of them, for instance, was keeping views open so that you can see in to a space. So a lot of parks are designed with grass, trees, and nothing in between. That's CPTED in practice. It's not CPTED in theory. In theory, it was conceived as an inclusive process to get all the concerned voices in the room, and that's how Svigals and partners designed Sandy Hook Elementary School. They had 50 community members making suggestions and decisions about how to redesign the school after the mass shooting. The result was a school that's designed as an embrace, the epitome of empathy and designing in love instead of fear. A second principle is to integrate schools into the neighborhood. This is the School of Arts and Enterprise in Pomona. It's a charter school in a neighborhood that is sort of equivalent to the Rust Belt in Southern California, though. And in the 90s, this school was conceived and designed as an integral part of the 2nd Street Arts District in downtown Pomona. It was, at the time, known as the deadliest zip code for children. And I say that because its idea is pretty radical. So instead of one major building fenced in and away from everyone that goes around it, it has 4 buildings that are all rehabilitated historic buildings or older buildings. And the students walk between the 4 buildings through downtown Pomona, and they feel like part of the community. The artists and the business owners get to know them and say hi to them on the street. And the grounds of their buildings are welcoming and open. Instead of 12-foot chain link fences, they have artist design lower gates. And their building design reflects this focus on the arts with the mural. A third strategy is to provide a sense of welcome and belonging. Which one of these entrances feels more welcome? Okay. It's the same school, redesigned in 1971, after earthquakes damaged this building. But you can see the focus now. The athletic field faces the main street. The entrance is this sign and a giant 8-foot fence. At Marshall High School in Fairfax County, Virginia, not only is there a clear inviting entry, but students are engaged in school tours as very important people come to visit their new green renovated school. And they gain a sense of pride and belonging by showing them things like permeable paving, a green roof, revelatory design with biofiltration swale going into a creek behind them. And part of it is these large windows that add daylight and views to nature. Providing experiential landscapes is especially important for students who learn differently or who might be struggling with mental health issues. Experiential landscapes and learning allows teachers to see students differently in a different light. Those students that struggle in the classroom with reading and writing exercises might come alive out in the landscape. And it also allows those students to see themselves differently and to start thinking of themselves as learners instead of behind. One of the ways to really do this is to invite artists. These are artists in Berlin who came to make a willow tunnel on one of their green schools. Another one came to work with the students to create these stone carvings on the school campus. We can invite artists, business owners, and senior citizens to participate in making and taking care of school grounds. We can allow them to help teach maintenance, art, natural processes, or practical skills. And there are school districts around the country that actually offer tax breaks to seniors who come volunteer in the schools. So there are ways to make this beneficial to both, in addition to adding a sense of community and mentorship to both the students and a sense of community and belonging for the senior citizens as well, which is becoming an issue that we're hearing about. This one is taken from the work of Magda Mostofa, an architect working on design for students with autism. Her design principles aspects includes organizing space according to the level of activity and noise. So this is the Eagle Rock High School, that same one with the chain link fence in front of it from an image a little while ago. And the activity levels in red are the highest and the loudest, in green are the quietest. And you can see they're sort of interspersed. This is really hard for students with sensory issues to move through space that is not orchestrated well. So a way to organize that better might be to cluster all of the louder, more active activities in one area of campus and then use the school buildings as buffers between them and the quieter spaces. This is taking all the same programming and rearranging it. I think there are more elegant ways if we start rethinking the programming as well. The New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene recently completed work with 10 different high schools to include a student-led design process to find out how we could use design to help mental health. And these are some examples. The restorative justice garden and the mindfulness space give students a place to go chill and hang out and restore their calm. For students who suffer trauma, anxiety, and trauma and anxiety and stress, it's very similar to those with sensory integration disorders. They need a quiet environment. They are more hypervigilant and sensitive to noise and visual chaos. So designing calm classrooms for students will help them, as well as all students, be more able to learn. Compare the typical classroom on the left. This is an image of an Los Angeles public middle school and one that's similar to almost every classroom I walk into in that school district. This is a classroom at Bridges Academy, a private school that the Los Angeles Unified School District sends students to if they can't meet their needs in terms of sensory integration. So you can see there's carpet on the floor, a much calmer visual presence, no chaotic posters everywhere. The glass window is actually open. These are closed, so you're really trapped looking at all that chaos. And also, students have the freedom to move their chairs away from their desks. And in fact, the students, each classroom has an area with bean bags or a carpet where students who can't sit on the chair for whatever reason can go sit on the floor or lie down or move or stand. Common areas of different sizes can also help with this idea of quiet. But in Finland, they're redesigning schools with the idea of preparing students for the workplace of the future with these big, open, flexible spaces. If you think about schools as work environment, that might help as a designer to put yourself in students' shoes and imagine spending 7 to 8 hours a day there. I think in the next few years it will be interesting and important to think about how our work environments might also need to change based on some of this research on how distracting it is to work in an open environment like that. Including big windows looking into trees and gardens so that students have that access to that restorative quality is important and will reduce stress in students and teachers, right? But it's only as helpful as the windows allow it to be. This is also Los Angeles public schools, but it's not so different from a lot of urban schools. Security grates are required on every first floor window. Those that don't have security grates have translucent film. I'm not sure why. I mean, yes, it allows daylight, but the research shows that daylight alone isn't enough. You need the green views as well. Let them swing. For teenagers as much as younger children and adults too, swinging brings us back to our bodies and grounds us in ourselves and re-regulates our systems. We're finding more and more with the trauma therapy world, especially somatic trauma therapy, if any of you are interested. That's trauma therapists that work with the body because of this strong body-mind connection and the idea that trauma is held in our bodies. So swinging, whether it's on traditional swings or hammocks that can be placed even to be social areas, or rocking chairs, or walking paths, all of these things allow us a swinging motion to bring us back into the present and into our bodies, which helps regain attention and reduce stress. Plenty of seating. This is an odd thing to talk about when it comes to mental health, but it's also one of those things that you notice after going to school after school after school. At Eagle Rock High School, this one on the left, I counted 500 places both inside and out for students to sit at lunch. There are 2,400 students in that school and they all have lunch at the same time for 30 minutes. So what does this do? It sets up a sense of scarcity and hierarchy. And you have students clustered around, and the other thing it does is it does not allow students to sit down and eat lunch. So here's another school in Bellingham, Washington, where they were creative use of space to double the amphitheater as overflow space for the cafeteria. And I'm not saying that's the ideal situation, but at least provide enough seating. And then in, I would say anywhere, but especially Southern California or other places where you're outside most throughout the day, provide plenty of shade. Again, this is that same outdoor space, and you can see students clustered anywhere there's a bit of shade, and the table that's out in the sunshine is empty. I have yet to see a school, and even Matsuoka in his dissertation on Michigan high schools said he didn't see a single school that couldn't benefit from a lot more trees and the shade that they provide. And the last one I'll say is don't poison them. This is maybe the hardest one, right? Because we don't have control over all of the products and all of the processes that go into schools. But these are a few things to pay attention to. The food system, plastic, even in irrigated landscapes, plastic and PVC is on the red list for the Living Building Challenge. It's on the list not to include in the healthcare guide. And then other sources of pollution, light pollution and sound pollution, air pollution. How can we start thinking systemically about school design to address these things? This is a list of those strategies if you want to take a picture. But just to reiterate, they're clustered into the idea of evidence-based security design. There is not evidence that 12-foot chain link fences and security cameras works. There is no research on it. In fact, the designer of Sandy Hook Elementary, Barry Spiegel, has just transitioned to Stanford University to study that very thing and to teach that very thing. So it'll be interesting to hear more from him. Student engagement, ask the students. Very rarely do students get to participate in the design of the spaces that they spend the majority of their time. And then this idea of mind, body, environment, you'll be hearing more and more about, I'm sure, over the next decade. I was recommending a book in studio today by Sarah Williams Goldhagen, Welcome to Your World, which has quite a lot of that research in it. What would a school look like if every design and programming decision was made out of love for the children and students, and with a concern for their mental health and well-being? Designing schools as calm, nurturing environments that build community will help all students, not just those struggling with mental health issues, as well as the teachers, the staff, and the greater school community that use the school. Let's create welcoming, beautiful, nurturing, restorative school environments where students feel like they want to be there, where they feel connected to each other, where they feel connected with their place. All of these things help mental health. Our youth face growing pressure, more stress, and higher rates of mental health issues than ever before. They deserve to be nurtured through access to nature and the sense that they matter. Our young people, our communities, and our planet will be better off because of their mental health and well-being. Thank you.
I'll take any questions that any of you might have for Claire.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks for joining us. I noticed actually in a lot of the photographs where you talked about wide open spaces in and around schools, that they were sports areas. Mm-hmm. And from my experience of kind of more urban environments in Europe, sport is one of the most successful things of overcoming social problems within inner city areas. So I'm just wondering, how much conflict do you have when it comes to landscape, and then a kind of functional landscape of of sport, bearing in mind how important it is in
Yeah.
how prevalent it is in schools and universities at the moment. So is there conflict there?
Yes.
What landscape means? Yeah.
Well, in urban schools where you have limited land area, the conflict comes, we've found, mostly with how do you define physical education and athleticism and health, physical health? How do you define physical health? And what qualifies as physical education? So one of the important things about Dr. Rainey's study is that she found that the students were more active on the green spaces after the Eagle Rock Elementary transformation than they had been before on the asphalt in those same spaces. One of the important thing to note, though, is that we worked with her really closely to understand which spaces were being used well before we designed. So we kept the basketball court, we kept a couple, like a tetherball, I think, that was really popular, or the little sports courts, which are basically paint on asphalt, that were popular and that were well used. The problem was that while sports might be really popular for some, it's not the best way to get all students to be active and engaged in their school landscape. So what was missing was any opportunity for those students that do better without the competitive play. And that's where you need to strike a balance. But there are school districts, and I've been, it's one of these interesting things where you have football issues now coming up again and again about brain injury, other sports as well. And then we have this, to me, that seems like a philosophical conflict. Are we promoting physical activity and sport that hurts the brain, or are we promoting education? And there are a couple cases where school districts to prioritize education have eliminated sports altogether, or at least some of the larger sports like football that take up so much space and so much energy when the entire school population goes out to the Friday night game and spends time being fans instead of students. It's, I'm sure, extremely controversial, especially at a Big Ten state university. I grew up as a Buckeye, so I know. But I think it's something worth thinking about and worth talking about, because sports are also often sources of conflict. Yes, they bring people together. They also cause rivalries that can burst into more than just harmful, or more than just, social games. They can cause real physical conflict as well. So I've been thinking about it. I don't know yet where I come down on it. Yeah.
So, like in Nebraska, where we have a much different climate and might not be able to utilize our outdoor spaces all year round, what are some strategies that you've seen deployed to still give students that access to the outdoors or some other area, rather than just sending them off to the gym for recess during the winter or cold climate?
It's interesting. Minneapolis a few years ago, maybe for several years, was voted best city for bicycling, and they had the highest percentages of bicycle commuters despite their crazy cold winters, right? Some of the leaders of the forest school movement are in Scandinavia, and I can't remember which of them said, it was one of my favorite quotes, "There's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing." So if you're prepared, there are whole schools that only stay outside, and a lot of them are in Norway and Scotland. But that said, I think at a minimum, we can make sure that our classrooms are designed to have either a space in the classroom or a space nearby where a student that's suffering or struggling can sort of step out for a minute, even just into the back of the room on a rocking chair or something, and where there are views to trees and gardens and a sense that you can get away from the stress of that moment, at a minimum. I've been thinking a lot about, because I grew up in Ohio and North Carolina, and we had very cold weather, cold winters, but still some of the buildings were outside and you'd pass between. I went to school in Chapel Hill. I mean, your campus is not under one roof. You're outside a lot between classes. And you actually get a lot of exercise walking between those buildings because it's a big campus, right? Would you say that's been a negative thing in your life? So I think rethinking what is a limitation. In Los Angeles, the thing that most people miss school for or have to stay inside for are fire days with ash coming out of the sky. I think severe air pollution like that, something that's dangerous to your lungs, good reasons to stay inside. Below, what's the cutoff for being outside where you get, a friend of mine lived in Alaska for a year and she said it was so cold that if you spilled water, it was ice before it hit the ground. Okay, maybe dangerous to go outside. I don't know. I actually don't know what the threshold is. We are learning more and more about the heat threshold. I actually think we have to be more concerned about heat as like in Los Angeles, in that region, we're expected to hit, to double the amount of days over 100 in the next 10 years. And that becomes dangerous, especially for those people that live in unair-conditioned apartments. And then you see schools can become a place where you can have a safe zone if they're designed to employ passive design systems or comfort zones, sort of the community resilience center for both indoor and outdoor resources, right? Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes.
Well, just so that the recorder can... Thanks. So my nephews actually go to Eagle Rock Elementary.
Wow.
And
small world.
So I'm quite familiar. I walked by there like a couple weeks ago. Before that, they went to a co-op preschool that is entirely outdoors. Like they don't even, I think they have an indoors with a bathroom or something, but they don't actually have any time indoors. And I think you were just talking about that. I wanted to follow up a little bit more on the idea of having a school that is almost predominantly outdoors. Mm-hmm. And that does there ever become a negative to being outdoors too much? I mean, is it possible to be outdoors too much? I mean, is there some need for balance? And what would that balance be between indoor and outdoor activity?
I think it's such a good question, and I wish I could give you a thoughtful answer. I haven't yet seen a middle school or high school that is outdoors 100% of the time. Even in the forest school model, usually they'll have like an indoor hub. I imagine that the biggest hurdle is that all of our education curriculum is based on testing. And all of that testing is based on traditional learning styles of reading, writing. Now technology is a big piece of that. Paper, books, iPads don't do well outdoors, especially in humid or rainy weather. So you're talking about two systems or two philosophies that don't. I think it would take a complete curriculum reversal. There is a movement called unschooling that quite a few, more and more people are doing I imagine some out of sheer desperation. My youngest unschooled for his final 3 years of high school because we just couldn't cope with the school system and the stress and the anxiety that it was causing. And I felt that after a time, it was more damaging to keep him in a school that was causing him to hate school than to, and we tried several different types, than to just take him out and let him learn what he wanted to. So long answer for, I don't know if there's, what the downsides would be, but there is a community that might know the answer to that. I've certainly been interested. Maybe that'll cause me to go find out and then get back to you.
Well, thank you so much.
you.
We appreciate it.
Oh, women. Thank you.